If you think the woods are silent, you're wrong. They're listening. I don't care how many camping trips you've been on, how many quiet trails you've walked, or how many times you've stood beneath a canopy of stars and convinced yourself the world was at peace. Spend enough time out there, deep enough where the cell signal dies and the last traces of civilization are swallowed by trees, and you'll understand. The silence isn't silence at all, it's a kind of breathing, a waiting. The woods remember everything that's ever happened beneath their branches, and some things never leave. You've probably felt it before, even if you brushed it off. That prickling on the back of your neck when you hear leaves crunch behind you. The sudden shift of the wind that makes you swear someone whispered your name. The way the shadows seem to move even when your flashlight stays steady. People say it's paranoia, imagination, the natural unease of being in an unfamiliar place. But what if I told you it wasn't? What if I told you that feeling was real? That's why I'm here tonight, to share stories that most people weren't supposed to hear. Stories that were buried, dismissed, or laughed off until they ruined someone's life. 13 tales from the haunted woods. Real accounts whispered from locals, hikers, rangers, and people who swore they'd never go back. Stories you'll want to tell yourself aren't true, even as something in you recognizes that they are. I'll warn you now, once you listen, you can't unhear them. They'll follow you the next time you find yourself standing under tall trees, where the light barely breaks through and every sound feels wrong. And if you think these are just ghost stories, campfire legends meant to scare kids, wait until you hear the last one. Because one of these stories still keeps me awake at night. Not because someone told it to me, not because I read it on a forum or dug it out of a dusty archive. No, it's because it happened to me. I'll save that for the end, though. You'll understand why. So let this be your invitation into the woods. Stay close, don't wander too far from the path, and whatever you do, keep listening. Because the moment you stop paying attention, that's when the forest decides you're not leaving. 13 stories. 13 warnings. And maybe if you're brave enough, you'll still step into the trees when this is over. But I wouldn't. I was camping alone when it happened. The kind of night where the fire burns low, and the forest feels like it's pressing in, reminding you how small you really are. I had been whistling to myself earlier. Just a dumb tune, something to fill the emptiness. I didn't even realize I'd stopped until I heard it again. The same melody, coming from the trees. At first I thought I was imagining it. I froze listening. But no, the whistle was real, faint and careful, almost playful. Someone out there was mimicking me. I called out, half joking, trying to sound braver than I felt. All right, you got me. Who's out there? No answer. Just the sound of wind moving through the branches. And then, the whistle again. Louder this time. Closer. The rational part of me scrambled for an explanation. Another camper, maybe? A hiker messing with me. But my gut knew better. I hadn't passed another soul all day, and my campsite was miles off the main trail. Whoever or whatever it was, it wanted me to know I wasn't alone. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it toward the sound. Just endless trees staring back. Shadows stacked on shadows. The whistle stopped. For a moment I thought it was over. But when I turned, the melody drifted from behind me. Exactly the same notes, just slower. Stretched out like whoever was whistling wanted me to hear each one. I can't explain the fear that gripped me then. It wasn't the normal kind of fear. The kind that makes your heart race. No, this was the kind that makes your body heavy, like the forest itself is holding you in place. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the dying fire, knife in hand, waiting for dawn. The whistling never came again, but I could feel eyes on me the whole time. And here's the thing, I never figured out who was out there. Maybe it was a person. Maybe it wasn't. But I've heard too many others tell the same story to believe it was just me. And I'm not the only one. It was late autumn when two friends of mine decided to hike through a stretch of woods most locals avoided. The map showed nothing unusual, just trees, streams, and a few long-forgotten logging roads. But the place carried a reputation. Strange noises, vanishings, Old stories whispered in town bars about things that didn't belong. They weren't the kind to scare easy. So when night began to fall and they saw a soft orange glow flickering through the trees, curiosity pulled them in. At first they thought it was a campfire, but as they pushed deeper, the glow resolved into something impossible, a cabin. It shouldn't have been there. The wood was aged, the shutters crooked, but a warm light spilled from its single window as though someone was inside waiting. They stopped a few yards away. Neither of them said it, but both felt the same wrongness. Cabins don't just appear where no roads lead, and yet, there it stood like it had been waiting for them all along. One of them whispered, "Do you see that? That light?" The other nodded slowly. There's no power for miles. As they watched, a shadow passed across the window. Not a trick of the flame, something solid moving. A figure, that was enough. Fear surged through them, sharp and undeniable. They turned and ran, stumbling over roots and rocks until their lungs burned. By the time they made it back to the trailhead, the light was gone from behind them. The next morning, determined to prove it wasn't a dream, they returned with another hiker. They retraced their steps, counted landmarks, even marked trees as they went. Hours of searching. And where the cabin had stood the night before, nothing, just unbroken forest, no foundation, no chimney stones, not even a clearing. They swore they hadn't imagined it. Two people don't see the same shadow move across the same glowing window unless it's real. But the woods had swallowed the cabin whole, erasing it like it had never been. Some say if you wander deep enough, the cabin will find you again. But if you do, don't look in the window. There's a creek that cuts through the woods not far from where I grew up. Locals always said it was bad luck to fish there after dark, though no one would ever explain why. I thought it was just superstition, until I heard what happened to a man who ignored the warning. He was an experienced fisherman, someone who knew those waters like the back of his hand. One summer evening, the sun slipped below the horizon faster than he expected, and by the time he packed his gear, the woods had already gone dark. The creek was quiet, nothing but the steady rush of water and the occasional splash of a trout. Then he noticed her, a pale woman, sitting on the far bank, her head bowed, shoulders trembling like she was crying. Her dress clung to her skin as though she'd just stepped out of the water. Long wet hair hid her face. Concern outweighed caution. He called across, asking if she was all right, but she didn't answer. Just the sound of running water, masking whatever sobs might have been there. So he crossed. The stones were slick under his boots. The current stronger than it looked, but he kept his eyes on her, afraid she might vanish if he blinked. And in a way, he was right. Because when he reached the opposite side, the woman was gone. No splash of water, no rustle of leaves, just empty ground where she'd been. He thought maybe she'd slipped away into the trees, but when he shined his flashlight, the beam caught something that froze him in place. Wet footprints. Small bear leading away from the creek and into the woods. He followed them with the light. 1 step, 2, 3, and then they just stopped. No trail, no body, nothing. Later, when he told the story, others nodded in grim recognition. They'd seen her too, the woman in white who weeps by the creek. Some say she's searching for the child she lost to the current. Others claim she lures people closer so the water can claim another soul. Either way, they all agreed on one thing. If you see her, don't cross. Hunters are used to strange noises in the woods. The crack of branches, the calls of animals, even the eerie stillness that sometimes falls right before a storm. But what they're not used to is hearing a child. One night, a pair of hunters were deep in the forest tracking deer. The moon was high, silver light spilling through the trees. That's when they heard it, a small, desperate voice crying for help. At first, they froze. It didn't make sense. No one brings a child this far out, especially not after dark. But the voice came again, higher, thinner, carrying through the still air. "Help me, please." They exchanged looks. One whispered, "We can't just ignore it." The other nodded, heart already pounding. They followed the sound, pushing through underbrush, calling out that they were coming. But no matter how close they thought they were, the voice always seemed just ahead, always a few steps deeper into the trees. Minutes turned into an hour. The woods grew darker, heavier until their flashlights cut only narrow tunnels through the night. Still, the child's voice carried always the same plea. "Help me." Finally, one hunter stopped. He realized something. He'd been hearing the voice clearly the entire time. Too clearly. The forest should have muffled it, swallowed the sound, but instead it seemed to drift around them, sometimes to the left, sometimes to the right, sometimes from both directions at once. That was when fear sank in. They decided to turn back, but the woods didn't make it easy. Every tree looked the same. The trail markers they swore they'd carved were gone. And the voice followed, closer now, almost mocking. By the time dawn broke, they stumbled out of the forest pale and shaking. They swore they'd never hunt there again. When they told the locals, the old ones just nodded knowingly. They said it had been happening for decades. People hearing a lost child in the woods. Some followed it and found nothing. Others never came back at all. And the strangest part, no child has ever been reported missing in that area. Not once. So if you ever hear it, if you hear a small, trembling voice calling for help deep in the trees, don't follow. Because whatever it isn't a child, and it doesn't want to be found. There's a trail I used to hike at night, back when I thought the woods were just woods, quiet, peaceful, harmless. That illusion ended the night I saw the eyes. It started with the feeling of being watched. Everyone says that, but you don't understand it until it happens to you. The way your skin prickles, the way your body somehow knows before your mind does. I stopped walking, turned in a slow circle, and that's when I saw them. Two glowing points in the dark. Red. Suspended higher than a man's head, motionless between the trees. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, maybe the reflection of my flashlight bouncing back at me, but when I angled the beam directly at the spot, the eyes didn't vanish. They blinked. I froze. My instinct screamed to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The eyes swayed slightly, like whatever they belonged to was shifting its weight, considering. Then slowly they began to follow me. Every time I took a step back on the trail, the eyes glided forward, keeping the distance the same. Not rushing. Not attacking.
Just watching. I tried to convince myself it was an animal, some nocturnal predator.
But no animal I've ever heard of had eyes like that or moved so silently. Not a twig snapped, not a leaf stirred, even as it closed the space between us. I didn't breathe until the first streaks of sunrise cut through the branches. And just like that, the eyes blinked one final time and vanished as if they'd never been there. I never went back to that trail, but sometimes when I'm alone at night, I get that same prickling feeling. And I wonder if those red eyes are still out there, waiting for the dark to return. There's a story I heard from a group of campers who swore they'd never set foot in the woods again. It wasn't because of an animal encounter or a storm or even getting lost. It was because of the drumming. It started late at night when the fire had burned low and the conversation had dwindled into silence. At first they thought it was distant thunder, a low steady beat carrying faintly through the trees. But as they listened closer, it wasn't thunder at all. It was rhythmic, intentional, like someone striking a drum in the darkness. Boom, boom, boom. One of them laughed nervously, saying it had to be another group camping nearby, maybe some kids messing around. But as the minutes passed, the drumming grew louder, sharper, echoing from different directions, as if more than one drum were being played. The campers called out, trying to get a response. No answer, just the relentless beat, closing in. The strange thing was, no one else in the area reported hearing it. Other campers, even rangers nearby, claimed the night had been completely quiet. But for them, the sound became unbearable, so loud it rattled in their chests, like it was inside their bodies instead of outside. Panic set in. One girl covered her ears, sobbing, while another swore she could feel the vibrations under her skin. A guy grabbed his flashlight and stormed into the trees, determined to catch whoever was doing it. He was gone less than 5 minutes. When he came back, he was pale, shaking, and refused to say what he'd seen. He only muttered that there was nothing out there. No people, no instruments, just trees. The drumming stopped as suddenly as it began. No fading, no retreat. One moment it was deafening, the next there was only silence. The group packed up and left before dawn, abandoning half their gear. When I asked one of them later why they never talked about it again, they looked me straight in the eye and said, because silence is worse. When you hear it once, you keep waiting for it to start again. I used to take night hikes with friends when we were teenagers, armed with cheap flashlights and bravado. We thought we were fearless, invincible even. But one of those hikes ended differently. One of those nights showed me something I'll never forget. We were walking single file along a narrow trail, joking and laughing to keep the nerves down. My flashlight beam caught our shadows stretching long across the dirt, tall and distorted. That's when I noticed mine wasn't keeping up. At first I thought it was just the angle. Shadows warp under moving light. But the more I walked, the clearer it became. My shadow lagged behind, a few seconds out of sync. I lifted my arm to test it. My hand rose instantly, but the shadow's hand followed slower, like it was delayed. I laughed it off, pointed it out to my friends, but they didn't see anything strange. Their shadows moved normally. Mine didn't. The longer I watched, the worse it got. My shadow stumbled when I didn't, twitched when I was still, and then at the next bend in the trail it did something impossible. It split. I froze, breath caught in my throat. There on the dirt were two silhouettes stretching from my feet. One perfectly matching me, and another standing just a little to the side, unmoving. I blinked, heart pounding, and the second shadow began to drift away, peeling off from me like it had a mind of its own. My flashlight flickered, and in that split second of darkness, the shadow was gone. I didn't tell my friends right then. What could I say that my shadow decided to leave me? But I know what I saw, and I know I'm not the only one. Sometimes late at night I'll catch a glimpse of it again, a second outline in the corner of my vision stretching across the floor even though there's only one of me standing there. And the worst part? Every time it shows up, it's closer. There's a certain part of the forest rangers don't mark on the public maps. If you ask them about it, they'll tell you it's just another stretch of woods, nothing special. But I've met one ranger who swore otherwise. He told me about the tree. He found it on a routine patrol miles from the nearest trail. At first, it just looked wrong. The bark was shredded, clawed as though an animal had raked at it again and again. Deep grooves, darker than they should have been, like they'd never healed. Dried stains ran down the trunk, stains that looked too much like blood. He might have dismissed it. Animals do strange things, except for what he heard that night. He camped nearby, too tired to hike back before sundown. Around midnight, when the fire had burned down to embers, the sound began, faint at first, just under the rustle of leaves. A moan, then a sob, then unmistakably a scream. Not an animal, human. It came from the tree. He swore he watched the trunk shudder as if something inside was pounding, trying to get out. The screams built until they echoed through the woods, raw and agonized. The kind of sound that tears at your stomach because you know it means suffering you can't imagine. He ran, stumbling through the dark, but the screams followed him no matter how far he got. Only at dawn did they stop, leaving him collapsed and shaking at the edge of the park road. When he told his supervisor, he was ordered to keep quiet. People don't need ghost stories, they said. But in the ranger's logbook, his private one, he wrote that he checked the site again later. The tree was still there, the claw marks deeper, and this time he noticed something carved faintly into the bark, half swallowed by the grooves. A name. The letters were nearly gone, but he could make out enough to realize it was a woman's. No missing persons were ever connected. No body was found, but the ranger told me he would never go back. He said the woods can absorb anything, violence, grief, pain, and sometimes they don't just hold on to it. Sometimes they let it out. So if you ever hear screaming in the trees, make sure it isn't coming from the trunk. Search parties get used to disappointment. Most of the time you're following faint trails, broken branches, footprints that vanish into mud. But one search party told me they found something that still keeps them awake at night. They were looking for a camper who hadn't returned after a weekend trip. The man had set out alone, confident in his skills. But after 3 days with no word, his family called for help. The rangers spread out, combing through miles of forest, until finally they spotted a patch of bright nylon through the trees. A tent. Relief surged through them. They thought they'd found him, but the closer they got, the stranger it became. The tent was intact, perfectly pitched, as if someone had taken their time setting it up. Inside, everything was in order. Sleeping bag neatly unrolled, lantern sitting by the flap, backpack leaned against the side. Nothing scattered, nothing broken, no sign of a struggle. Even more unsettling, the tent was warm, as though someone had just been there, just stepped out a moment ago. And yet, there were no footprints, not leading into the tent, not leading away. The ground was soft, the kind that should have held every step, but it was pristine. They called out his name, circled the area, searched every direction. Nothing. The forest swallowed the sound of their voices. One ranger swore he felt like someone was standing just behind him, breathing down his neck. But every time he turned, there was only empty air in the silent tent waiting. Eventually, they packed up the man's belongings and carried them back. The camper was never found. No trace of him ever surfaced. Some of the search party whispered later that the tent felt like a trap. Like it wasn't meant for the missing man at all, but for whoever stumbled across it. And that's the part that keeps me awake. Because when you think about it, if you were camping deep in the woods and came across a perfect waiting tent, wouldn't you step inside? There's a story that makes me uneasy every time I think about it. It's about a man who went hiking with 2 friends. They were experienced, careful, the kind of people who triple-check their packs before leaving the trailhead. But halfway through the trip, one of them vanished. They had been crossing a ridge when they noticed he was gone. No cry, no slip, no sound at all, just gone. The 2 remaining friends searched for hours, shouting his name until their voices were hoarse. Nothing. As night fell, panic set in. They finally set up camp, planning to alert rangers at first light. That's when one of them heard it. Footsteps outside the tent. He unzipped the flap, and there he was. The missing friend, smiling sheepishly, saying he'd just gotten turned around. Relief washed over them so quickly they didn't question it. They hugged him, scolded him, laughed about the scare. But later, small things didn't add up. When they offered him food, he hesitated like he didn't remember how to eat it. His clothes looked the same, but the mud on his boots didn't match the ground around camp. He kept suggesting they hike deeper into the forest farther off the map, saying it would be fun. The longer they sat with him, the stranger it felt. His laugh was too loud. His smile lingered too long. And when one of the friends dropped a knife by accident, they both swore they saw the returned hiker flinch. Not from the blade, but like the metal itself hurt him. By morning, they made an excuse to head back. He protested, trying to convince them to stay, to go just a little farther. But they were firm. Finally, he sighed and followed. They never made it back together. Days later, search teams found the body of the missing friend at the bottom of a ravine, miles from where he'd returned. The coroner estimated he'd been dead the entire time. So who or what walked with them that night? What sat by their fire, smiling with familiar teeth, asking them to go deeper into the woods? Some people say the forest doesn't just take. Sometimes it gives something back. But what it returns isn't meant to survive outside the trees. There's nothing more unsettling in the woods than realizing you're lost. But sometimes it isn't just about losing your way. It's about the forest refusing to let you leave. A backpacker once told me about a trail that trapped him. It was supposed to be a quick day hike, a simple loop back to his car. The first time he saw the fallen log across the path, he didn't think much of it. Stepped over it, kept walking. An hour later, he saw the same log. Same cracked bark, same moss curling along its side. He laughed nervously, figuring he must have circled back without realizing. But then it happened again and again. Each time the log was there in the same place, like the trail was looping in on itself. He marked the bark with his knife, but when he came across it again, the mark was gone. Panic set in. He started running, convinced he could break the cycle if he moved fast enough. But no matter how far he went, the woods rearranged themselves, steering him back to that log. The air grew heavier. Shadows deepened even though the sun should have been high. Hours passed, though his watch refused to move. The strangest part? He swore the forest was watching him unravel. Birds fell silent. Branches leaned closer overhead. Even the ground felt softer, like it was swallowing his footsteps. By the time exhaustion forced him to stop, he dropped beside the log one last time. His throat was dry, his legs shaking. And that's when he noticed something carved into the wood he hadn't seen before. Letters. Jagged, desperate scratches forming the words, "Help me." They weren't his. He never explained how he finally escaped. Only that he woke up at the trailhead at dawn, lying in the dirt with no memory of getting there. His pack was gone. His knife was gone, and he swore that somewhere in those woods, others were still walking, stuck in the same loop, carving the same words into that same fallen log. And maybe, if you ever hike that trail, you'll see them too. There's a sound I hope you never hear in the woods. A sound that doesn't belong to any animal or person, though it might pretend to. People call it the Midnight Choir. A group of campers first told me about it. They were deep in the forest, the kind of place where the stars burned so bright they almost hurt to look at. The night was calm, the fire low, when one of them froze and asked, "Do you hear that?" At first it was faint, almost like wind moving through tall grass. Then slowly voices emerged. Dozens of them, low-layered, singing in harmony. A song without words, only a rise and fall that made the hairs on the back of their necks stand straight up. The sound was beautiful in its own way, but wrong. Too perfect, too inhuman. None of the voices cracked, none stumbled, and the song seemed to come from everywhere at once, surrounding the camp like the trees themselves were humming. They sat frozen, listening as the melody swelled, louder, stronger, until it was all they could hear. One camper swore he felt it vibrating in his chest, syncing with his heartbeat. Another said the fire began to flicker in rhythm with the voices, as if it too was caught in the song. Then, without warning, the choir stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the music. A suffocating quiet, as though the whole forest was holding its breath. Just as they began to relax, a single voice rose out of the dark. A child's voice this time, clear, sweet, singing a tune that none of them recognized, but each would swear later felt hauntingly familiar. And then, just as suddenly, silence again. They didn't sleep that night. At dawn, they packed up and left, abandoning gear around the fire. None of them would return. When I asked one of them years later what the song sounded like, he shook his head and said, "It wasn't music. It was something trying to teach us how to listen. I wasn't going to tell this one, Honestly, I debated leaving it out because once you hear it, you'll understand why I don't camp alone anymore. Why I don't even like driving past the tree line after dark. But if I've asked you to sit with all these other stories, it's only fair I share the one that still wakes me up at night. It happened a few years ago. I was camping solo miles from the nearest trail. I'd done it before, so I wasn't worried. I had my tent, my fire, my gear. It should have been just another night under the stars. But something was wrong from the beginning. The woods felt heavy. That's the only way I can describe it. Like the air itself carried weight pressing down on me, making every sound sharper. The crack of a twig, the shuffle of leaves, it all seemed too loud, like the forest wanted me to notice. I tried to ignore it, told myself I was being paranoid. But when the fire burned low and I crawled into my tent, that's when the real fear began. At first it was subtle, soft footsteps circling my camp, slow, deliberate, like whoever it was wanted me to know they were there. I held my breath, straining to listen. The steps paused, then started again, closer this time. I reached for the knife I kept by my sleeping bag, clutching it so tight my knuckles hurt. Minutes stretched into hours. I never heard the footsteps walk away. They just kept circling as though waiting for me to make a move, and then the shadow. The moon had risen, casting pale light through the thin fabric of my tent. That's when I saw it. A tall, distorted silhouette standing just outside. Perfectly still. Its head tilted as if it were studying me. I didn't blink. I didn't breathe. I couldn't. The shadow lingered there, unmoving, for what felt like forever. My heart hammered so loud I was sure it could hear it. I wanted to scream, to run, but some deeper instinct told me not to. That if I acknowledged it, if I gave it what it wanted, I wouldn't see the morning. Eventually, exhaustion took me. I don't remember falling asleep, but I woke at dawn to find the shadow gone. The ground outside was undisturbed. No footprints, no sign anyone had been there. Just trees swaying gently in the breeze like the night had never happened. I packed up and left without breakfast, without looking back. And I've never gone camping alone since. Because here's the thing. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks. Maybe it was the stress of being out there alone. But I know what I felt. I know what I saw. And I know that whatever stood outside my tent that night saw me too. The woods are older than we are. Older than our towns, older than our roads, older than the stories we whisper to explain them. And I think that's why they feel the way they do. They remember. Every life taken, every secret buried, every scream that faded into the trees. It's still there, soaked into the roots and the soil, waiting. We walk in thinking the forest belongs to us. We carve trails, pitch tents, build fires, and tell ourselves we're in control. But the truth is, we're visitors. Temporary guests in a place that doesn't forget. And maybe that's why so many people who venture too far never come back. Maybe the woods don't just remember, they collect. Pieces of us. Footsteps, shadows, echoes of laughter and fear. Some stories fade, others linger, and some keep repeating until someone else stumbles into them. 13 stories, 13 warnings, people vanishing without a trace, voices that don't belong, places that shift and change like they're alive. You can dismiss them as folklore, call them campfire tales meant to scare kids, but deep down you know better. We all do, because the next time you're walking under those trees, when the branches blot out the stars and the silence grows heavy, you'll feel it. That prickling at the back of your neck. That quiet breath that isn't yours. That sense that you're not just being watched, you're being remembered. I told you at the beginning one of these stories was mine, and I wish I could say it ended there, that nothing's followed me since. But I can't. Because some nights, when the house is dark and the wind rattles the windows, I swear I hear those same footsteps outside my door. The woods don't let go, they don't forgive, they don't forget. So the next time you find yourself alone among the trees, stop. Listen closely. Because if the forest decides to remember you, it won't matter how far you run. And when that moment comes, don't say I didn't warn you.